So throughout my time as a YouTuber, I've been known to have some pretty off-the-wall takes. Oftentimes, I find myself defending movies that, to my surprise, a lot of people don't like. So the thought had never really occurred to me to make the video that I'm making today. But thanks to Greg Martin, a viewer of this channel, I'm going to. Today, I'm going to give you 10 movies that I think are really overrated. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Nick here from the Lost River Drive-In, and today I want to give you guys 10 horror movies that I think are insanely overrated. Now, this could be for a variety of reasons. These could be movies that I like, but I do not think they deserve the acclaim that they get. And again, I have to stress that I do like some of these movies. This is not to say that I hate all these movies and I think that they are just garbage. No, I like quite a few of them. But the praise they get, I feel like, is way overhyped, and it's time for me to reel it back in a little bit. And the first one that I want to talk about is one that I hear talked about all the time, and that is Midsummer. Look, if you guys have followed my channel for any amount of time, you know that I have always leaned into the fact that this is called Midsummer, because I find this movie to be very middling at best. Look, I get it. Ari Aster was riding a high after Hereditary. Everybody knew who this guy was. He had broken onto the scene. He had a bona fide hit in Hereditary. I think he got a little too big for his britches when it came to Midsummer. See, I respect the fact that he wanted to do something totally different. Let's have a movie like set in the daytime in Sweden. Like, you know, he wanted to do something odd, do something out there. But I just don't think it really worked. Sadly, more times than not, I find myself laughing at this movie, not at all scared or in any kind of suspense. And I feel like that's a failure in and of itself. That's not to say that I think this movie is bad, because I don't think it's bad. But the fact that people will put this on the level of Hereditary, if not above it, I find to be absolutely asinine. And you will not find me saying that this movie is anywhere near as good as Hereditary. Next one is going to be Jordan Peele's Us. And I feel like this is very, very similar to the situation with Midsummer. See, Jordan Peele had broken onto the scene with Get Out, and he had earned a lot of goodwill from people for that one movie, just like Ari Aster did with Hereditary. So I feel like it clouded some people's judgments walking out of Us. Look, Us is a well-made movie. Lupita Nyong'o's great in the movie, and I love the NWA scene. That is like my favorite part of this movie. Having said that, I just think everything else about it is just pretty fanfare, run-of-the-mill slasher movie. I don't think there's anything exceptional about this movie at all. I was not surprised. I was not scared. I just don't really think there's much there. It's a plot we've seen before, doppelgangers. How many times have we seen that in horror movies? Now again, that's not to take away from the technical craftsmanship that is on display in this movie and the performances that are fantastic. But I just feel like it's a movie that never really gripped me, and I think people just overrate it because they loved Get Out. Next up is going to be one you've probably heard Christian and I go in on the podcast before, and that is The Babadook. And look, I will genuinely never understand why this movie gets so much praise. This is probably the first one on this list that I can say not only do I find it overrated, I hate this movie. This movie is all about symbolism, metaphors, allegory. I get it. I totally get it. None of it is too highbrow for me. It doesn't go over my head. I totally understand what this movie is, yet I still find it to be cringy, anger-inducing, and just flat out boring. And I'm sorry, when you're selling yourself as this big monster movie and it's really all just metaphor, it kind of pisses me off. And you can do that if you had a more deft hand when it came to filmmaking, and I just don't think it's really there. I think this movie is kind of shoddily made, and I cannot stand the child that is screaming throughout the entire movie. If that was my kid, he's at the orphanage. I'm sorry, but The Babadook, it blows. Next up is one that a lot of people claim to be one of the strongest in the series, and I just don't see it. And that is Scream 4. Now look, I know some of you Scream 4 truthers are probably mad hearing me say that, but hear me out here. It's not that I don't like Emma Roberts. I do like her as an actress, and I think that her plot is absolutely believable in this movie. I totally get the motive, and I think that she sells it in the third act there, where she's beating the shit out of herself. Having said that, there's so much about this movie that I find to just be largely forgettable. A lot of these characters, aside from Kirby, are just forgettable. I even find Jill to be largely forgettable. Sure, her third act, craziness is memorable, but up to that point, she's pretty forgettable, and her monologue is absolutely cringeworthy. I think this was a movie that didn't know if it wanted to go to the new generation or go back to the old. It kind of tried to play both, and it didn't do either one particularly well. Again, aside from Kirby. Also, it really does not help that this movie intentionally was filmed to look like it was filmed on freaking Instagram. There's just a filter throughout it. There's this glimmer, this sheen throughout the entire film that actually hurts my eyes. This, I think, is easily the most forgettable Scream movie. I do not find this movie to be remarkable in any way, and I find it vastly overrated. Next up is going to be Summer of '84, and I heard a lot of people talk about this movie, and I hadn't seen it until my buddy Rudy sent the Blu-ray to me a couple years ago. And I sat and thought, you know what? This does sound like it's right up my alley, right? I love Stranger Things. I love the whole 80s aesthetic. I love 80s slasher movies. Like, what's not to love? A lot about this movie. I didn't review this movie on my channel because I was actually quite let down by it. Look, once you get to the third act, I actually think it's quite good. But everything else leading up to that point, I find it to be really, really cringy. They lean so heavily into the 80s nostalgia that it just does not seem real at all. Like, it just seems so forced. I think the acting by a lot of the kids is just not that great, and I do not buy the dynamic whatsoever in their friend group. I watched this movie one time, and I thought to myself, that was super unremarkable. Like, it just comes more across as a made-for-TV movie. And I guess I had higher hopes for that, especially hearing all the great things I heard about the movie. So while I don't think the movie's bad, and I do think it redeems itself mostly in the third act, 2/3 of this movie is largely forgettable, and overall, it's just overrated. In the spirit of fairness, I have to list one that you guys probably did not expect, and that is going to be Halloween 2 from 1981. Now look, this is another one of those movies that is a good movie, objectively speaking. It's never been one of my favorite Halloween movies. It never will be one of my favorite Halloween movies. That's not to take away from some of the great things this movie has to offer, and truly there are some great things in the movie. But I think that the middle portion of this movie is a drag, a slog. It is straight up boring. Whereas in the first movie, there was that specter of Michael always haunting. You know, that suspense was effective. I felt like John Carpenter was really able to portray that when the character wasn't on screen. That lurking presence was ever felt. But in this movie, I just don't think Rick Rosenthal is anywhere near as good a director as John Carpenter, and quite frankly, it shows. The movie where it's supposed to be these long, drawn-out, suspenseful sequences, oh, he could pop around every corner, it just comes across as boring. It's like a Lifetime movie. So yes, while Halloween 2 starts off with a bang and ends with a bang, I feel like largely it's forgettable. So Halloween 2, it's overrated. Next up is one that I'm sure I'm going to get tomatoes slung at me for, but hear me out. And that's going to be It from 1990. Technically a miniseries, not really a movie, but you guys know what I mean here. Look, I grew up on this. I loved it. It scared the crap out of me. Tim Curry is fantastic in this movie. The first half, part 1 of the miniseries is pretty damn good. Part 2 is awful. I'm sorry, I've always felt that way, even as a kid. Whether it's the acting, whether it's the lack of camaraderie, whether it's the giant freaking spider creature. And again, part of that is not really the miniseries' fault because that's Stephen King's book. I've read it, and I can tell you, the adult stuff is nowhere near as strong as the kid stuff. Stephen King has always done the kid stuff well because it's a relatable perspective to him. I feel like it's just what he does well. He puts himself back in his shoes when he was that age. But he's never done the adult stuff all that well. And he sure as hell doesn't do endings all that well most of the time. And this is another example of that. And if you go back and watch this movie or miniseries, yes, the things that stand out to you stand out still. Tim Curry and the first half of it in particular. But everything else really stands out like a sore thumb, and that's not a good thing. And I'm sorry, even if you have issues with It Chapter 2, it is vastly superior to the second half of this miniseries, and I think the 2017 and 2019 It films are collectively far better than this. Next up is one that I have talked about before, and I get crap for it every single time, but screw it, I'm doing it again. Friday the 13th, the original film. Look, I'm one of those people that thinks that, I don't know, maybe the next 5 Friday the 13th movies are more enjoyable than this one. Objectively better, I don't know if I'd go there with Part 5, but I have more fun with Part 5, and I'd probably rather watch that than the original. I think Friday the 13th is just largely kind of boring. And please, please miss me with the, oh, you just don't get it crap. No, I definitely do. I can enjoy a good slow burn. I can enjoy a good suspenseful thriller. I can enjoy a good mystery, a good whodunit. I just feel like Friday the 13th largely didn't really know what it was doing, and it didn't hit its stride until Jason Voorhees came into the picture. And sadly, that's not in this film. Now, that's not to say that Mrs. Voorhees isn't a great killer in this movie, because she is. But they cheat so many freaking times that it's obviously not this little old woman killing these people. It is painfully obvious. While there are some cool kills in this movie, again, I just think Friday the 13th really took off with part 2 and it didn't look back. So Friday the 13th is one that I've just always felt to be really overrated. Next up is going to be a movie that I saw at a young age that took the world by storm when America was really trying to get into J-horror, and that is The Grudge. Look, I remember this movie scaring the crap out of me. Like, I remembered this movie was super effective, super memorable. I loved it. And then as an adult, I went back and watched it and I said, wow, this movie kind of sucks. And watching it again just a couple years ago for a third time to see if I still liked it, I was like, oh my God, no, this movie is bad. I don't think there's been a good American Grudge film. And that's a shame because The Ring shows that you can do J-horror in America and make it effective. Sadly, The Grudge is incredibly cringy. Look, I think there's really bad performances, really bad effects. I don't think it's scary at all. And honestly, I found myself to be bored most of this movie. I don't know what kind of glasses I had on when I was watching it the first time as a child. Maybe it was just the fact that I was a child and I was easily scared. But my Lord, this movie is not good. So this is one of the cases where I say not only is it overrated, I just don't think it's good. And last but certainly not least is going to be the original, the Amityville Horror. Now, I didn't grow up in the 60s and 70s, so I can't speak to what it might have been like to see this movie, especially after the real-life case of Ronald DeFeo. But I've never been a huge fan of this original film. There's maybe 2 or 3 moments in this movie that I genuinely find effective, and the rest of it I find to be genuinely boring. And that's not to say, again, that I don't like old school horror movies like this, because I don't know, Halloween's my favorite movie ever. I love The Exorcist. Again, I think it just matters how you handle that. How is there suspense? Is there buildup? Is there tension? Or does it largely just feel like filler until you're getting to your finale? And I'm sorry, but Amityville Horror just feels like filler. Look, this movie is a classic for a reason. There's enough that's memorable about this movie that can keep you coming back year after year. And I understand why it scared people back in the day. But I'm sorry, I will take the remake over this movie every day and twice on Sunday. I think that movie is far more enjoyable and far scarier. Look, guys, it's not lost on me that I'm sure I mentioned a movie in this list that you happen to love. That's kind of the point of doing a video like this. These are 10 movies that are generally highly regarded by most people, but have just never really done it for me, or maybe did it for me at one point, and now I look back and go, no, that wasn't very good. So it's supposed to create conversation. And I want to hear down below if you guys agree with anything I said, or if I am totally off base with all 10 of them. Whatever it is, comment down below, let me know. Also, tell me one that you think is overrated that I didn't mention, that you hear people talk about all the time, that you have just never gotten the love for. I want to hear it down below in the comments section. Please leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. This is Nick at the Lost River Drive-In, and I'm pulling out.